Give me 10 minutes of your time and I'm going to show you how to make any lawnmower run reliably. Behind me here, I have an older Craftsman riding lawnmower. I picked this mower up yesterday for $150. As you can see, it's in pretty good condition in terms of the decking and the metal. My biggest concern was rust. The deck has to be replaced on my other riding lawnmower, and even though the engine works great, it would cost me as much to replace the deck as it would to buy a used lawnmower. And in the ad, it said that the mower was operating, but there was a bang, I'm assuming some kind of backfire, and then the engine quit running, and it would not fire after it had stalled out. So the engine does turn over, but it will not fire, it will not run. So the steps that I'm going to take you guys through can be applied to any 4-stroke lawnmower engine. So before we start digging into this mower, I want you guys really to think about what an engine actually is. It's nothing more than a glorified air pump that uses combustion to produce the power to rotate the crankshaft. In order for your engine to run, we have to have fuel, we have to have spark, and we've got to have compression. If you have those 3 things in order and there's nothing else wrong with the engine, you will have yourself a running engine every single time. First thing you're going to want to do is just make sure it's got all its parts. If this engine has all the bits and pieces, then we can definitely fix it. Okay, so we know the engine is turning over. I smell a little bit of gas when I turn this engine over. That's actually a good sign because that tells me that there is likely gas getting to the carburetor. So let's get the spark plug out of here and see if we're getting spark. That's usually the easiest step to check for first. Now make sure that you are grounding that spark plug to the engine. It has to be grounded or it will not spark. Let's go ahead and disconnect our engine kill because sometimes these are faulty and will cause it to ground out. So that may have been why the fella disconnected it. Look at that. Okay, so now it is sparking with our kill switch disconnected. Look how easy this engine is to turn over. Okay, so we have a compression problem, and if you remember, we need spark, we need fuel, and we need compression. I'm pretty sure the engine is getting fuel, so I believe that we do not need to clean the carburetor on this. If it was not popping or sputtering and you had compression, then the next thing we'd want to look at is the carburetor. But because we know we've got good spark, we've got fuel getting into the engine because it did fire immediately upon turning the engine over. However, we can turn this engine over very easily by hand. We know that we don't have compression. It's a lot easier to adjust the valves on an overhead valve engine, but I'm going to show you guys how we can adjust the valves on this flathead engine. First thing that we need to do is we need to pull off the carburetor and we need to pull off the muffler. So let's do that first. Now in this particular engine, it doesn't actually look like we need to remove our muffler. Again, this is a Briggs 13.5 horsepower. It's an older flathead engine. This should usually just have 2 bolts on either side, and that's the one we need access to. We're going to go ahead and pull this cover off. So in through that side cover, that is how we access our valves. Now, one thing that you're going to want to have on hand when you're servicing these engines is a good feeler gauge set. They're not expensive, and it's something that everyone should have in their garage. So on the exhaust valve, we have 0 clearance. I'm also now checking the intake valve. Also, the intake valve, we have 0 clearance. Because this is a flathead design, what we're going to have to do is take the head off, and we're going to have to file down these valves so they seat properly. So I'll show you how to do that. Now, most of the time when these engines are not working, people haven't maintained them. Typically, we'll come back to a dirty carburetor or a plugged up carburetor, the jets in the carburetor that needs cleaning. This is a little bit more of an advanced fix, so I'm kind of glad that we're going through this together. So what we've got here is this is the valve seat. This, unfortunately, is I don't want to say it's common, but it is an issue with these flathead Briggs that these will actually come loose. The valve seat goes in, but once that valve seat is in place, these get staked into place. But for whatever reason, this particular one came loose. So I'm going to show you guys how I can still repair this. But first, I need to get the other valve out of here so that way we can grind down the proper valve clearance on both the exhaust and the intake before reassembling this. So let's go ahead and get that other valve pulled out of there, and then I'll show you how to repair a loose valve seat. Okay, so I was successful in getting our two valves removed from the engine. These are the easy type of retainers to pull out. Basically what you're doing is getting a screwdriver in here or a wrench or some other type of tool. You are pulling back on the spring, and when you do pull on that spring, you can see how this gets real loose. And then you just have to get a screwdriver or something in there to kind of pry it out. And then it comes loose and the valve will slide out from the head of the engine. Okay guys, so this is what we're dealing with the valve seat. Now if yours is completely loose, like mine is, you want to make sure that the tapered end is facing up towards the valve, because that is the actual valve seat. In the case of this, you can see the valve came down on the corner of this, nicking it a little bit, so we are going to regrind a little bit of our valves. But the way this works is this sits down inside here, and sometimes these get loose. That's not incredibly unusual that these will pull loose from these older flathead engines. But what I am going to do is I'm going to mix up some JB Weld, and I'm going to JB Weld this down into the engine block first, and then I'll show you how I pin this into place. Now before this JB Weld sets, I'm going to show you how we're going to pin this into place. Now I'm just using this steel punch here, and what we're going to do is we're going to come around the outside here and put just a few punches around the outside of this aluminum. Combination of that and our JB Weld ought to hold it in place for a good long time to come. Now while we're letting this JB Weld set, we're going to go ahead and grind down our two valves to the appropriate length. And the 6/1000 feeler gauge is snug, so we're at about 5/1000 on the intake side. That's going to be okay. Anything between about 4 to 8/1000 should work okay with this engine. Now we just do repeat the same on the exhaust side. We're already at top dead center here, so we know that these valves should be fully closed. There's about 1/1000 clearance on the exhaust side. So I'm going to take this down about 5 more thousandths, 5 or 6 more thousandths, and we should be good to go on this one. Okay, so now we're at 8 thou on the exhaust side. So that's perfect. We'll leave that one alone. Okay, so now I've got both valves installed, and here's where we're at. I'm going to crank the engine over by hand, and we want to verify the valve lash one last time here. So 6 thou on the intake side and 8 thou on the exhaust side. Those are going to be pretty good numbers. Your engine may vary a little bit. If you use those numbers on an older engine like this, it's really not going to be much of a problem. That's about where we wanted it. Get this head to seal. All right, well now that she's all put back together, let's see if she'll fire up. Well, that's it for me, guys. I'd like to thank our sponsor. If you found this video helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up. That helps us get a little bit more recognition. Thanks for watching Dirt Gear TV. I'll see you guys in the next one.
Oh yeah!